Do you remember what it was like to be a part of the school system as a student? I mean, what was the atmosphere?
The school's integrated in 1952 in Kingsville, around the time that I was beginning school. Uh, was raised in a what you would call I don't know what the sociological word for it is, but it was like a commune. I mean, it was all centered around my grandparents' homes. My parents lived there. Two or three uncles lived. It was 1 acre plot. Even though it was in town, it was a 1 acre plot, and we all lived together. We all gardened together. We all raised animals together. We picked, collected the eggs together and that kind of thing. And it was strictly what I would call uh, a Hispanic, a Spanish community. Let me put it this way: when I started school, I knew one word in English because that was the word that my grandfather always used. Okie dokie.
and and you would go to school and that it would be in English. I mean, you were taught in
The
English.
school was in English, and it was a mixed class. When I first started, see, I was in low beginners, and then I was in high beginners, and then I was in low kinder and high kinder. It seems like I spent like about a couple of years trying to get to the first grade. It was
And that was
it was
simply
difficult because I didn't know I didn't know what was being said, and even though my first teacher was Hispanic, one of the very first in town. She did not speak Spanish to us, and we were not permitted to ask anything in Spanish. I mean, sometimes we would really be desperate, and we would want to ask something in Spanish, and she would not permit it until you said it in English. Then they would respond to us. It was.
And what was the effect of the English only rule on the kids?
Well, it was definitely a challenge.
Did, were the kids picking it up quickly? Did you?
I felt like I was. I felt like I was. I had an advantage, even though the community that I just spoke about, my grandparent Soliz's community, even though that was Hispanic, then there was my mother's side of the family. My grandfather was a little bit more I don't know, I guess worldly. He had been to World War I for one thing, and he uh, he was very he pressed us to learn, and especially English once we started school. And he would not speak any Spanish to us. Once we started school, he would not speak any Spanish, and so that helped a lot. And he made me feel good about the fact that I was learning English.
But is it fair to say that the majority of the kids who spoke Spanish only and went to English only school became discouraged, or
I don't know that we had time to be discouraged. We were too busy being scared. It's cultural shock at its best, especially for kids. It was scary. It was scary because, like, by the time I did get to the first grade, I was going to a school that was integrated, and they had the neighborhood policy kind of thing, and it just so happened the neighborhood we lived in at that time, um, there were Anglos and there were Hispanics, and so we were mixed.
what was that like?
Well, again, a little bit of cultural shock. There was a difference in the way in how they dressed and how they spoke, but uh, and it was obvious that they were understanding everything that was being said in the classroom. So there was a little bit of competition also, but at the same time, probably some encouragement. You know, we wanted to learn to communicate with them. I think the nice thing about kids at that age is that they don't know how to discriminate.
So you weren't being called names. You weren't being.
Oh no, no, not that I recall. Not at the beginning of school. By the time I got to the third grade, we moved into another community where we went to an all Hispanic. It was all Hispanic. So that too was cultural shock, because we were going to school with some pretty tough Hispanics. In Kingsville, we have what was called La Colonia, which was, I guess you would say, it was the most underdeveloped. It was the most underdeveloped part of town, and there were some rather tough kids over there. I think it was tougher to get along with some of them than it was with some of the Anglos, and especially since we had been to a white school, they kind of looked down on us. I had been to a white school for up to the third grade, and they kind of looked down on us, and just the other Mexican kids, just. But I don't see that it really became, as far as the teachers were concerned, I don't know that there was that much of a problem. I don't know that there was that much of a problem. The other good thing about young kids when they're young is that they adjust quickly, and we did.
And so by middle and early high school, do you remember what your mindset
was? Completely different situation. Because I went to the same middle school or junior high that you went to. I was at Gillette there as a kid. And of course it was a lot bigger, and there was a lot meaner kids there. The hazing was very popular, very, very common. And there I did start feeling that
tension.
That tension, that uncomfortable feeling that you get when you are around somebody that doesn't like you. I think that's the first time I became aware of ethnic differences, and especially since they really enforced the don't speak Spanish at school policy there. I don't remember that was an issue in elementary school.
What year was that in middle school?
This was 58, 59, 60.
What impact did that have on you personally?
Oh yeah, to be quite honest with you, Jason, I was always a little bit of a nerd.
So let's speak, kids like you who weren't as fortunate enough to be sort of on a different track. What impact did it have on the brown kids in general?
Let me put it this way. I would say in those days, I think the dropout year was during the 7th or 8th. Let's see, we had 7th, 8th, and 9th grade at the middle school, and 7th and 8th grade is where most of the kids dropped out who, for some reason or another, did not feel comfortable in school, or they had to go work, or they were migrants, or for whatever reason. I think a lot of it was due to the fact that they were uncomfortable in the school setting. And I would say that 60-70% of the kids, of the Hispanic kids that I started out with at elementary, by the time we came to middle school, to junior high, I would say it was a high number of kids that quit school that year, including a whole bunch of my cousins, which kind of ticked me off because a lot of my cousins were a lot smarter than I was. But for some reason, they always quit school in the 7th and 8th grade. You know, it was sad. By that time, we were on the same side as the naval base, so there were a lot of Navy kids who went to that school that I went to, as they did when you were there. And some of those kids were not local. They were not from South Texas. They came in from other parts of the country. And you could see the open animosity that they held towards people that were different from them. You know? So it was not unpopular to be called all kinds of not so nice names, you know.
And there was an administration and a system set up that said
That
it's okay.
They turned their heads. They turned their heads on this. And see, the thing about living in a small town, I got to teach at that same school many years later with some of the people who had been my teachers. And you learned what kind of people they really were when you're in the teacher's lounge, you know, and you realize that you were really, as a minority, I think we put up with a whole bunch of stuff that is probably considered illegal. There's no question about it. It's considered illegal. I remember one of the white teachers that I had as a math teacher walked in the lounge one time, and one of the other white teachers was crying. And he walked in despite the fact that myself and several other Hispanic teachers were in the lounge. You know, okay, let me know what Mexican hit you this time. I said, wow, you know, this is. And the lady informed me, says, look, it's nothing like that, you know, has nothing to do with any other kids or anybody. It was interesting because you got to meet some of I got to work with some of my teachers who had been, and I realized that a lot of those white teachers were really good teachers that were responsible possibly for my success. Do you know what I'm talking about? When you, sometimes you have I can think back, not only in my profession, but in my personal job. It just seems to me like there were a lot of good people out there of all colors, you know, that really helped us to move along. It wasn't always a discrimination thing. There were some white teachers out there that really had our education at heart, and they challenged us, yes, not to demean us, but possibly to challenge us to become something better. And I appreciate that, you know. I still, there's very few of them left alive now, but I still stay in touch with some of those teachers. They were awesome people, you know, just, and it's funny because those were the teachers that we considered to be the meanest. You know, they were the toughest, the meanest and whatnot. Some of them had taught my father, you know, and we were always scared of them. But come to find out, they were some of the best teachers that I had. When I went to school at that place, I think I mentioned this to you in other conversations, I think there were like 2 Hispanic teachers there. There were coaches. By the time I came, we left Kingsville for a while, and by the time we came back, like 8, 10 years later, when I went to teach there, something like maybe 50, 60% of the teachers were Hispanic.
What year was that?
That was in 1975. The social, quote, civil rights movement of South Texas was, for most practical purposes, over by then. That was post Mayo, post Raza Unida, Brown Berets, and all of that stuff happened while I was. We went up to Bay City, close to the Houston area. My wife and I did, where I first started teaching.
So what was the culture in the schools and in the community when you came back in '75?
Oh, considerably, definitely different. Definitely different. It is amazing. It is amazing what role models can do for you. And let's face it, when I was going through school, when I was going through middle school and even high school, because in high school I think we had, out of maybe 40, 50 faculty, there was again only one Hispanic, and he was a coach. So for most practical purposes, we didn't have any role models that were Hispanic when I was a student in middle school and in high school. Now, when I came back, there were a whole bunch more teachers that were Hispanic by then, and I think it definitely made a difference. In working with the kids, you could see that the students had a different kind of attitude. I probably would have gotten in trouble then. This is around the age that I had your brothers, and you came a couple of years later in class, and I probably would have gotten in trouble had my administrators known that I spoke Spanish to a lot of my kids. You know, especially when. No, they come in spurts, but we were getting a whole bunch of kids that were coming in from Mexico who absolutely knew nothing, no English at all. I mean, it's one thing not to know English when you start school, but to be in the 6th and the 7th grade and not know it is tough on those kids. So if I could see that the kids were not understanding what was being told to them, I'd go and speak Spanish to them, you know, and just. So, but also the role model thing, you know, it just, we can preach to kids as long as we want to, that education is the answer to a better quality of life, to whatever, getting a better job. But if they don't see any proof, it means nothing. You know, you're just preaching to them. But when a kid sees, hey, if this kid who was raised, if this guy, this teacher, was raised in the same neighborhood that I was raised in, you know, maybe I can finish high school. Maybe I can go to college. Maybe I can get a good job eventually. So that issue of role models is very important, and I don't know what we're going to do now because
We'll talk about.
We have the role models now, but there seems to be less stability in the communities. You know, just. There's too many other influences too many other factors that have to do with whether a young person decides to get an education or not.
So when you came on, was obviously the dropout rate shrunk because, more Mexicano teachers equal less of a dropout?
I think we could probably say that. Yeah,
And
because for another factor, another important factor. By the time I came back, the laws had already changed as to when you could drop out of school. When I was going through there, they were dropping out in the 7th and 8th grade because it was permissible by law at that age to be once you turned 13, I think you could drop out of school. But and of course, something like 58 to 75, almost 20 years later, it had changed simply because the law said, hey, you can't drop out of school.
What was your job like on a daily basis? Were you fighting administration? Were you
every teacher you talk to is going to tell you the same thing. We've been fighting administration for a long time.
So you know more as a Latino teacher than any other teacher?
I don't know that it necessarily had anything to do with being a Latino teacher. I think we were fighting administration because why? Because administrators are pretty close-minded. They have a completely different, their goals, their objectives is completely are different. They have to run a physical plant there. They have to make things run smoothly. They're sometimes I think they're pretty cold. They're not too concerned about the kids. They want to make sure that teachers are behaving properly, that janitors are arriving on time, and that kids are not skipping out or drinking in the parking lot. Those kinds of things that have to do with managing a group of people has very little to do with self-esteem and they'll talk up a good storm. And again, you can tell that I was never an administrator, but they'll talk up a good storm about we gotta give kids we gotta make them feel good about themselves and self-esteem. But for most parts, I found that most of my administrators it was just lip service.
So, because of your past experience, it seems to me that, and correct me if I'm wrong, and just by me remembering those times, the role of mentor was just as important, if not more, than role of teacher for you.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's probably cliche-ish, but I used to say, somebody asked, well, what do you teach? And I would say, I teach students, But to me, it was more important. And to this day, even though I've been retired for 12 years, I'm still playing that role.
Yeah.
I want to make young people, I want to make them aware of their history, what their ancestors went through. Now that I'm retired, I had a lot more time to look at some of the history and the culture of South Texas. And it just seems to me that one of the best things you can do for kids is to make them feel good about who they are. It's not uncommon. It wasn't uncommon when in my latter years of my profession and my career, for kids to come up and say, to have that attitude, hey, I'm a loser. My father was a loser, my grandfather was a loser, and I'm a loser. And somehow or another, you have to get in there and say, you were wrong, uh, they weren't losers. And you start telling them something about the awesome culture of the people who lived here, especially with Tejanos. It's a little bit harder to get the message across to immigrants that have just come in recently or whatever. But to some of those Tejano kids who are 5 generations Tejana, you know, whose ancestors were born in Texas, a lot of them long before Texas was even a state. Once you start telling those kids about that and say, hey, you know, maybe I am somebody, maybe it's time to break that loser cycle, you know? That cycle that, well, my grandparents were on welfare, and my parents were on welfare, and I'm gonna be on welfare. And you gotta break that cycle somehow or another, you know, and it just seems like when you can make kids feel proud about their past, it really helps a lot. We really need to do a complete remake of our curriculum, especially in history. And I would assume that it would be the same if you're in a German community or an Irish community or whatever. But with the Hispanics, down especially in South Texas, we really need to rethink our history. It's funny how you can see potential. If you're really in tune, you know, if you're into that, it's funny how you can come up to a kid and you can listen, you can look at him, you can watch him for a few minutes. If you're into that kind of thing, there's a lot of teachers that don't care about that. You know, they just want to get their subject matter, especially now. They just want to get those objectives, those TEKs or whatever the heck they're called nowadays. They just want to get that across. But if you're in tune with your kids and if you really...
And I saw with my own eyes the impact of what it meant to be a true mentor to these kids. And I see it now. I know them as adults, as grown men with children of their own. And to sort of track it back to that time frame. And I know that there was other factors besides you, but I want you to take a little bit of credit and, you know, self-indulge.
If it's a compliment, I will gracefully take it, but the winner in this whole situation is me. I mean,
you remember those times? You remember?
Of course I do. I told you I was out at King's Inn earlier tonight. Mm-hmm. I was having dinner with one of my ex-students, who is probably in his early 40s now. He's the vice president of AT&T. And he's got kids of his own, and extremely successful. And he credits me, even though sometimes, I don't know. He says despite the fact that I have in a gifted and talented class, he says he would have failed the 7th grade because I came to his aid. But anyway, I stuck with this kid to this day. He calls every Friday night at 10:30, 11, he's gonna call me. He's in his backyard drinking his wine, and I'm in my backyard drinking my wine, and he calls me, and the conversations never get boring. It's always about something different. It's always about his kids or my kids or whatever. And he's just one of many, you know. And here you know what the point I'm making is that kind of a relationship. It's mutual, and thank you for your respect. But all of us want to know that what we have accomplished in life, that we had a job where we made a difference. I think being a teacher is not an easy thing, and one of the few perks of it is to have. I had a kid call me last Christmas. I hadn't heard from him. he was probably at middle school around the same time that you were there, maybe a couple of years before. I hadn't heard from him. And I remember his name because his dad was the athletic director at the high school. But he called me from somewhere up in Fort Worth area, and he says, Mr. Soliz, he says, this is Morgan Walker. He says, I don't know if you remember me or not, but I was your student at Gillette. And I said, yeah, Morgan, I remember you. And I said, I remember your sister Fawn also. You know, and he says, wow. You know, he was surprised that I remembered. He says, well, I've been looking for you for several years, and I finally got a hold of your number. And he says, and I just wanted to tell you that I know that I was a sorry SOB when I was in your class. And to be quite honest with you, he was. He every chance he got, he tried to get me in trouble with his parents. And his parents were vocal. And they cost me many a sleepless night. But anyway, here he is 25 years later calling me back and saying, I just wanted to say that I think about you all the time, and I'm a teacher now, and I'm a coach, and I work with gifted kids, and I want to thank you because I still use you as a role model. Well, you know, shit, that's better than money, you know? When somebody tells you that, you know, you didn't go through all of that work for nothing. And I think if teachers would just give themselves a little bit of a chance to and go the extra half mile to be that way, I think they would realize, man, it is a good feeling, you know, to see, hey, you know, I touched some lives.
You know what was different about you? Besides many things. You were the first person in my life to talk to me as an adult, like an adult. I remember being 11 years old and having never been talked to.
That can get you in a hell of a lot of trouble too, though.
And it was really dangerous, and it shocked the hell out of me and Jacob with a teacher treating me like an adult. And I will never forget that. And it was that precise moment that the transition from boy to like, okay, yes, I'm going to be a grown-up one day.
Man, and what a tool to have in your bag if you can get away with it. When you're working with a whole bunch of adolescents going through puberty, the best tool you have in your bag is to validate them as men and to treat them that way. You know, I'm not saying, you know,
we weren't
go to the point of being vulgar or whatever,
yeah.
But you know, somebody told me very early when I started working with gifted and talented kids, of which I consider you one, that when the best thing that the teacher of the gifted kid can do is to leave them alone. And the whole time that I was doing that, and for most parts when I'm mentoring, you know, I've mentored several kids through college now. The educator has to take a role as a facilitator. You know, what can I help you with? What information do you need? You know, tell me what errands to run for you. Whatever, and you put them all out there, and then you let the kid surprise you. You know, you don't want to give them too many information because you don't want a regurgitation of what you just. You know, I could have had my doctorate degree.
Sure.
But all of that stuff that they were doing in school, I didn't want to be doing all that stuff. I want to be working with kids, you know. It's a little bit different. And I see a whole bunch of my friends have a doctorate degree, people who graduated from high school with me. And they have admirable resumes and all kinds of success stories, but I kind of like what I did.
Your resumes are flesh and blood, and
Exactly. And hopefully they will pass it on.